Cult leaders. Driven to manipulate. Fueled by egomania. Charismatic.
Sometimes he exuded all this love from his face.
But beneath the allure can lurk danger.
And he looked at me with shark eyes, just devoid of life.
How do cult leaders control the minds of others? And which of them is most evil? A scale exists to measure the darkest corners of human behavior. It weighs the criminal mind and the crime. From impulsive murderers to serial killers, this 22-point scale attempts to determine who are the most evil. Cult leaders are driven by narcissism. They want to control others. Shoko Asahara convinced some of Japan's best and brightest to commit mass murder. Adolfo Constanzo drew his followers into a cult of voodoo and human sacrifice. 4 Los Angeles cult members brutally murdered 7 people. They were disciples of Charles Manson. Fueled by overdeveloped egos, these cult leaders shaped their worlds in their own vision. They manipulated others to perform vicious acts. But where does the evil lie? Dr. Michael Stone of Columbia University created the 22-point scale of evil. It distinguishes between killers whose minds are overtaken by madness and those who are in control of their actions. To place each cult leader on his scale, Dr. Stone examines the cruelty of their acts and the evolution of their beliefs. He begins with Shoko Asahara. March the 20th, 1995. During the morning rush hour in Tokyo, lethal sarin gas was released into the subway system. 12 died. 1,000 were injured. The perpetrators were not common criminals. They were doctors, lawyers, scientists. All were members of the doomsday cult Aum Shinri Kyo, a faith preaching Armageddon. The founder of this religion was Shoko Asahara, a partially blind, middle-aged former yoga instructor. How did Asahara compel well-educated people to commit such an evil act?
To inflict violence on such a massive scale, one must have a delusional view of the world and of his place in it. The leader of a group that carries out this violence must clearly be a master of manipulation and must be bankrupt of remorse. Mercifully, it is rare for one individual to possess both traits.
Born into a poor family in March 1955, Asahara was given the name Chizuo Matsumoto. His father was a craftsman. After Chizuo lost most of his eyesight to infantile glaucoma, his family sent him away to a school for the blind. Because he had somewhat more sight than his more severely disabled classmates, he was able to bully them. He became both feared and followed. The boy loved to read science fiction and claimed he would one day rule a robot kingdom. After school, he applied to a prestigious Tokyo university, but was rejected. While Matsumoto's academic career had come to a close, he would soon flourish as the leader of a religious cult that included highly trained scientists. some of whom set about developing weapons of mass destruction. Chizuo Matsumoto lost most of his eyesight at an early age and spent much of his childhood at a school for the blind in Japan. There he developed the ability to both bully and lead his peers. But when he finished secondary school in 1977, he was not admitted to university. He began practicing acupuncture and teaching yoga. Matsumoto discovered the writings of Nostradamus, the 16th century French astrologer who foretold the end of the world. The young man became obsessed with the idea of Armageddon. He began to have delusions while meditating. In one, he claimed to have been called to become a god of light and directed to create an army to bring about Armageddon. Matsumoto believed that he would survive the apocalypse and emerge as ruler of the world. In 1987, he changed his name to Shoko Asahara and formed a religion called Aum Shinri Kyo, or Supreme Truth. He registered himself as the leader.
Asahara's visions appear to be the sign of a delusional disorder. The fact that he is a guru, yoga instructor, and therefore already in a position of authority, makes his delusions potentially more harmful to others.
Asahara attracted new followers using persuasive videos that claimed he possessed godlike powers. He targeted intelligent but lost souls, among them scientists and engineers, who were seeking meaning in their lives. He told them that if they followed him, they would find a path to salvation in a new world. But that world could only be created if this one was destroyed. By 1990, Asahara had recruited 5,000 adherents. He ordered some of his scientist followers to develop a wired helmet for new students to wear. Its purpose? To align their brainwaves with Asahara's in order to better understand his thoughts. It was called the PSI, Perfect Salvation Initiation. He also ordered cult members to wear masks of his likeness and, while wearing them, to demonstrate devotion.
As Asahara's disciples continued to worship him as a god, his ego is inflated, and his delusions are intensified, ultimately making him even more dangerous.
But Asahara's ultimate goal was the creation of a new world by bringing about Armageddon. His scientist followers were directed to develop weapons of mass destruction. They set up a factory to produce the deadly nerve gas, sarin. The Doomsday Cult was preparing for a massive attack. In 1995, Asahara ordered the release of the deadly sarin into the Tokyo subway. The March 20th attack killed 12 and wounded 1,000. He and his inner circle were arrested and charged with multiple counts of murder. Asahara expressed disappointment about the low death toll.
Self-centered and psychopathic, Asahara revealed his general contempt for humanity by scheming to commit murders that would spark an apocalyptic war. There was an extremely high level of evil in Asahara. His delusions, however, qualify as a form of mental illness. For that reason, I cannot place him at the highest level of my scale. Therefore, I place him at level 16, psychopaths committing multiple vicious acts with one or two extraordinarily vicious acts.
Asahara was sentenced to death and awaits execution. Like Asahara, many cult leaders claim a direct line of communication with God or a deity. Laurentian University neuroanatomist Michael Persinger believes he has found an explanation for this phenomenon.
We now realize that all experience comes from brain activity, or even religious experiences are a product of a certain pattern of brain stimulation.
Persinger believes that when the brain's temporal lobe, the region responsible for comprehension, is overstimulated by electromagnetic activity, cerebral seizures can develop that may lead to delusions. These delusions can cause individuals to believe that they've had an encounter with a divine being or beings. Persinger claims that he can induce these delusions in healthy test subjects by overstimulating their temporal lobes. He does this by generating electromagnetic fields in their brains. Persinger's research team uses an EEG to record these quasi-mystical experiences as they occur.
The common experience is the feeling of knowing, hearing your voice called or name called, hearing knowledge being given to you. If the person personally identifies them as being God or some other deity, that's the powerful phenomenon that drives individuals.
Persinger believes that cult leaders who hear voices suffer from temporal lobe epilepsy, a condition that naturally overstimulates the brain with electromagnetic activity.
There is a distribution of cult leaders which are convinced that they are doing this by cosmic consent, and almost invariably they have to proselytize. They have to spread the word.
Shoko Asahara preached Armageddon. Another delusional cult leader, Adolfo Constanzo, claimed that the voices of gods urged him to sacrifice humans. April 1989, Matamoros, Mexico, near the US border. Police exhumed 13 mutilated bodies. One of the victims was an American university student, Mark Kilroy. His brain had been removed and his legs cut off. Other bodies showed signs of torture. Many had been decapitated. Nearby, police found a shed filled with evidence of black magic and human sacrifice. Inside, Mark Kilroy's brain was found stewing in a cauldron called an ngunga. The owner of the shed was cult leader Adolfo Constanzo, a voodoo-practicing drug dealer. His cult members believed he possessed supernatural powers. They helped him commit cold-blooded murder.
Torture and subjecting the unwilling to human sacrifice are the most extreme forms of violence. These are the acts I consider the most heinous on my scale of evil. But before I can place Constanzo on my scale, I must look at his entire life.
Adolfo Constanzo was born in Miami in 1962. His Cuban mother was a priestess of the African religion Palo Mayombe. She believed that Constanzo was a chosen one, destined for greatness in the world of evil, and she groomed him for this future. As a child, Constanzo was taught to torture and kill animals. He was praised for exhibiting no remorse. At the age of 21, Constanzo took possession of an nganga, which was filled with a brew made from sacrificed animals. This ceremony concluded his training as a Palo Mayombe priest.
Learning almost nothing but black magic and animal sacrifice since birth, it is clear that Constanzo's environment played a key role in who he would become. Raised by his mother to believe that he was destined for greatness, Constanzo developed megalomania. Desensitized to inflicting pain and confident in his own supernatural abilities, Constanzo had all the elements of a deadly cult leader.
In 1984, Constanzo set up shop as a Palo Mayombe priest in Mexico City. He quickly gained a following by performing ritualistic cleansings and telling fortunes. He became a trusted advisor to wealthy drug kingpins, advising them when it was safe to move their product. They were unaware that Constanzo was secretly bribing the police for this information. The drug dealer's profits were increasing, and Constanzo was perceived to have supernatural powers. The dealers treated him with reverence, believing he was a godlike protector. Some became students of his black magic religion and demonstrated their devotion by obeying his every command, even turning over partial control of their drug cartels. Constanzo grew rich and powerful and quickly became more than a priest for hire. He led his devoted followers into the world of human sacrifice. In 1988, the cult leader moved his operations to a remote ranch near the Texas border. He built a temple in a small shed and ordered his followers to bring him victims for sadistic human sacrifice rituals. Over the course of 2 years, Constanzo and his cult members slaughtered 13 people in the little shed. They targeted the poor and petty criminals, whose disappearances went largely unnoticed. But when they snatched Mark Kilroy, an American student whose family had powerful political connections, everything changed. The media picked up on Kilroy's disappearance. When police found his body on Constanzo's ranch, they also uncovered details of the twisted cult.
The FBI joined in the search today for leaders of a drug-smuggling cult that slaughtered at least 13 people in a Mexican border town.
Police cornered Constanzo in Mexico City, but a member killed him before he could be arrested.
Adolfo Constanzo did not simply commit murder. He compelled his followers to bring him victims to use in human sacrifice. The ritualized torture and the degree to which Constanzo enjoyed inflicting pain on his victims before killing them correspond in my scale of evil as some of the most heinous of crimes. For this reason, Adolfo Constanzo scores a 22 on my scale. This is the highest category on the scale.
Cult leaders like Adolfo Constanzo possess highly inflated egos. They recruit followers who worship them as gods. Is this narcissism linked to their violence?
Narcissists are fine as long as you praise them or treat them nicely, but as soon as you insult them or criticize them in any way, they become very defensive and very aggressive.
Dr. Brad Bushman, a senior research professor at the University of Michigan, studies the causes and consequences of human aggression.
This sense of entitlement can be dangerous when you think you're better than other people.
To test his theory, Bushman conducted an experiment to find out how narcissists react when they are insulted. He looked for participants with the biggest egos using a series of multiple-choice questions.
Participants are forced to choose between one of two responses. For example, if I ruled the world, it would be a better place, versus the thought of ruling the world frightens the hell out of me.
Once Bushman identified the narcissists,
Just want to come in and have a seat over here.
he asked them to write an essay. They were told that their essays would be marked by someone they could not see. In fact, there was no other person. The essays were assigned a grade.
The experimenter then flips a coin. If it's a head, the experimenter writes an A on the paper along with the comment, great essay. If it's a tails, the experimenter writes an F on the essay along with the comment, this is one of the worst essays I've ever read.
Okay, here's your partner's evaluation of your essay.
To explore how narcissists reacted to a failing mark compared to how a control group reacted, Bushman afforded all those participants who received poor marks the opportunity to confront the person they believed had scored their exam.
You can't give people guns or knives or even boxing gloves. So in our studies, what we do is they have a chance to blast their partner with loud noise through a pair of headphones. And they get to choose the level of noise, as well as how long their partner suffers.
Narcissists consistently selected excessively high noise levels, in contrast to the control group.
We'll look at the whole range of scores. The results of our study show that when narcissists get a good grade, they're not very aggressive, but when they get a bad grade, they set louder and longer noise blasts. Narcissistic people believe they're more deserving, they're entitled to special treatment. When they suffer a blow to their ego, when they're criticized or humiliated, they become very defensive, become very angry, and are likely to lash out and behave aggressively to others.
The link between narcissism and aggression is especially evident in the man who might be the most infamous cult leader in history. Los Angeles, August 1969. Over the course of a weekend, police discovered 7 bodies at 2 crime scenes. The victims had been stabbed and shot. Messages had been cut into their flesh and scrawled on the walls in blood. They were wealthy socialites, and included film actress Sharon Tate, who was 8 months pregnant with director-husband Roman Polanski's child. 3 months after the gruesome killings, investigators linked the murders to several young hippies living on an old film location, a ranch north of LA. One of the suspects admitted that the impetus had come from their leader, a self-proclaimed messiah named Charles Manson. Police were astounded. How could this short career criminal have had the power to turn middle-class kids into savage killers?
Charles Manson is the perfect prototype of a brutal cult leader. He manipulates his followers to commit his violent crimes for him. When ordering members of his cults to kill, he asserts his power and his control, satisfying his megalomania. The pain and death that his victims suffer is evidence of his hatred towards society.
Dr. Stone interviewed Catherine Scher, a one-time member of the Manson family, hoping to discover how he had managed to manipulate cult members.
Catherine Scher did not take part in the murders, yet she did live with him on the ranch, and I'm hoping she will give us rare insight into the mind of a cult leader who convinced his followers to commit murder for him as acts of devotion. So what do you think it was about him that conferred that power as you think back?
You know, sometimes he exuded all this love from his face. When he's smiling and his eyes are shining, he looks very benevolent. Everybody was drawn to him. None of us thought he was crazy. He was just fascinating. He was just totally confident. One-on-one with you, he would be very caring, would work on your inadequacies, your needs, you know, help you take away your fears. Every night he would talk about what your parents did to you and that they were all wrong and you were the bright ones, and he just knew what people needed. He drew all our need out and he became everything that we wanted.
Did he think of himself as godlike in some way, or a special being?
He never had to say so. He was real good at letting you come to that conclusion. Mm-hmm. He was really good into subliminal messages, talking about one thing and slipping in another. He must be Christ, he must be Christ, he must be Christ.
Yeah.
Mostly I thought he was a prophet. I thought that he heard from God and God spoke through him. That's what I thought.
Charles Manson is an extreme narcissist. To understand better how he develops into a manipulative and evil cult leader, I need first to look into his childhood.
Cincinnati, Ohio, in the American Midwest, 1934. Charles Manson was born to a troubled 16-year-old runaway who did not want a child. He never knew his biological father. The name Manson came from a man who had been briefly married to his mother. During his childhood, Manson's mother often disappeared for days or weeks at a time. Once, she traded him for a pitcher of beer. His uncle tracked him down days later. At the age of 12, he was sent to the first of many reform schools. He was small in stature and overcompensated by bullying others. When he was 13 years old, he ran away from the reform school. His mother promptly sent him back.
This is a defining moment of abandonment for the young Manson. He is a non-entity, discarded by both family and society.
Manson continued escaping from reform schools and began committing increasingly violent crimes. Car theft, armed robbery, rape. He spent 2 years in prison. He urged his girlfriends to prostitute themselves and acted as their pimp. He scammed other women out of money. In 1960, at the age of 25, Charles Manson was sentenced to 10 years in prison for violating his parole conditions. Having spent most of his life locked up, Manson felt rejected by the world. He schemed to retaliate by creating his own society where he would be loved as a leader. Released from jail 3 years early in 1967, Manson moved to San Francisco, where he easily melded into the hippie scene. He lured naive young women who were rebellious but also vulnerable. Manson fed them LSD and asked them to give up all their thoughts to follow him into a greater life. Sometimes he had them mimic his actions to prove their loyalty. One such follower was Catherine Scher.
You know, I just wanted to be loved so badly that I just became whatever any man that would pay some attention to me wanted me to be.
Scher met Manson in the summer of 1968, when she was a 25-year-old hippie living in Los Angeles.
Charlie came up in a car and said, "Hey, let's all go swimming." And he looked me straight in the eyes and pierced my eyes and said, "This is your dream, girl. Start living it." And I was fascinated. I was definitely fascinated.
That same year, a group of men and women accompanied Manson to an abandoned film set outside Los Angeles. Catherine Scher was one of them.
When you isolate someone or a group of people, there's no newspapers, there's no television, there's no parents, there's no family. You have to, burn all bridges. He becomes, the newscaster, the prophet, the, father, mother, everything. It was never a discussion. There was no discussions going on. It was us soaking up, almost like little birds with their mouths open, tell us more, feed us. He'd talk about what's going to happen in the future and things that are going to happen and prophetic things.
Manson preached that Armageddon was coming and that his followers must be loyal to him or they would not survive. They believed him.
He was not teaching that we're going to go and kill people. He was teaching survival. It's a blueprint for every cult that's ever been. Your leader is the only one that has the in with God and knows what's going to go on, and if you don't follow, then you're not going to survive it.
But was there a period of time when your tendency to think was expunged?
He would, first of all, put you down in front of everybody for thinking. He'd say, thinking is stinking. But he was just stealing everyone's soul to the point where they couldn't even form a thought.
When mind control didn't work, Manson used the threat of violence. Catherine, known in the family as Gypsy, was called to meet with Manson and another follower, who was called Clem.
And he looked at Clem and says, Clem, would you do anything for me? And Clem said, sure, I would. So this is what I want you to do. If Gypsy tries to leave, I want you to hunt her down, find her, tie her behind a car, and drag her. Don't kill her, just drag her all the way back to Spawn Ranch, slowly. Would you do that for me, brother? And Clem grinned and said, sure. Then he looked at me and said, Gypsy, are you going anywhere? And I said, no.
In August of 1969, Manson proved his power as a cult leader. He gave 4 of his followers knives and sent them into the homes of strangers to exhibit their loyalty. He told them, if you're going to do something, leave something witchy. They took that to mean bloody slaughter. 7 people lost their lives.
Tell me something about that phrase, helter-skelter, and its relationship to the Beatles and what it meant within the Manson entourage.
Well, we listened to the Beatles a lot. We were really taught to listen carefully to all the words, but our mindset was that the Beatles had tapped in to Charlie's truth, not the other way around. And so Charlie never said helter-skelter, but he had always said, it's coming down, it's all coming down, it's all coming down. And in the song Helter-Skelter, they were singing, it's coming down fast. And helter-skelter means confusion. And Charlie had already been teaching that everything would be insane, confusion.
Chaos.
Chaos. And so basically we thought, oh, Charlie knows all this and they're tapped in. So that's how the helter-skelter thing wrote on a wall.
Do you have any idea, looking back, as to what the trigger may have been in his mind as to why this should be the beginning, or this should be the day when these things happened, as opposed to last month or September?
My opinion is that he was probably going to lose control. It was a control issue.
And why was he going to lose control?
Because if you tell people for 3 straight years that everyone's going to go crazy, and they go to town and people are, going to the movies and getting ice cream cones and going to the beach and having fun, and it's still not happening, that you're going to lose control. It's just so long that the cult leader can keep control.
What was changing in Charlie that pushed him near the edge of the cliff, if I can put it that way?
Charlie started changing, getting a little bit more insane, becoming more violent with us. It was getting to the point where we had to get out of town. It was all going to come down. He used terms like, it's all coming down. everything's coming down.
Catherine Scher is convinced that her fellow cult members were so deeply under Manson's spell that they weren't responsible for their actions.
I do not believe they had any knowledge of what they were about to do or where they were going to go.
Until the last moment.
Until they walked onto the... They were so programmed by then to do exactly what they were told.
Brainwashed and
Just
under
brainwashed completely, to the point where they had no will of their own left.
When Manson and his cult members were captured, a media frenzy ensued. America was bewildered by the young women who worshipped this small, crazy-eyed criminal. Catherine Scher remained loyal to Manson throughout the trial and protested against his incarceration.
How can you say that there's no question of his innocence unless you were with him at the time and it was somewhere else?
Well, the newspapers now are dropping the word alleged. I can say anything I want to say.
She demonstrated her loyalty with bizarre acts of devotion.
This was a crawl that we made. He gave us acid and said he wanted us to do that. And we crawled on our hands and knees all the way from the Sunset Strip to the courthouse. And I didn't think anybody took pictures of it. Very short hair. There I am.
What should be the meaning of that?
To show the devotion that we had to Charles Manson.
It took years for Catherine Scher to break out of Manson's control. But now, at the age of 64, she no longer calls him her leader.
My eyes started opening and I started seeing that he was a user, and he was a liar, and he was a coward.
Manson has come to represent most people's picture of evil. But he himself does not commit the acts of torture and violence necessary to reach the highest level of my scale. Manson's evil acts come in the form of manipulation and control of the people who commit the murders. Because he never actually kills the victims in the Tate LaBianca case, but only influences others to do so, I place him near the top of my scale, but not at the top. Charles Manson is a psychopathic murderer with a narcissistic compulsion to be worshipped. He ranks at level 15 on my scale of evil.
California abolished the death penalty in 1972, and the Manson family sentences were commuted to life in prison. Charles Manson, now in his 70s, still manages to attract the desperate and naive. And he even remains an icon for some. But the death toll that resulted from Manson's twisted schemes is dwarfed by the tragedy that unfolded in a South American jungle in 1978. The most deadly cult massacre ever. Cult leaders prey on vulnerable seekers and exploit their innermost needs. Charles Manson's followers proved their devotion by committing murder. But can brainwashed cult members go even further? Will they kill themselves? November the 18th, 1978, Guyana, South America. 909 American citizens lay dead in the rainforest. They had been members of the People's Temple, a San Francisco-based church. Their leader had been Jim Jones, a Christian minister turned political firebrand.
Why do you keep playing with that which men call God and we call socialism incarnate? I'm a liberator, I'm a savior.
The cult moved to Guyana and built Jonestown, which they believed would be a utopia. But when several members of the People's Temple tried to return to the US with a congressional delegation that had come to investigate troubling reports about the cult, Jones wanted everyone dead. He urged everyone to kill themselves by drinking cyanide. 909 people died. Had he become so respected that all his followers happily took their own lives? Dr. Stone spoke with Tim Carter, one of only 4 cult members who left Jonestown alive.
You're a rare survivor of what started out as a utopia that ended up a dystopia. Let's begin with Jones ordering everyone into the pavilion.
The sky turned black, and on my life I am telling the truth. It literally felt like evil itself flew into Jonestown.
Carter maintains what took place on that dark day was more murder than suicide.
Number one, children don't commit suicide. In terms of children and seniors and the number of people that were injected, were over 600 people. How many people drank poison because they thought that what Jones was saying was the truth? You know, I think this is a much smaller number. Even though it should have been absolutely obvious to me what was going on, it wasn't, because the part of me was going, no, this can't be happening. This isn't real. This doesn't make any sense. This doesn't compute on any level. You do not kill everybody because some people wanted to leave this community.
Carter attempted to outwit Jones and save his family, including his wife and 15-month-old son, Malcolm. But he was too late.
So I go back up to the pavilion, and I turn to my right, and Malcolm was having poison squirted into his mouth. There were screams of horror. There were screams of agony. You know, Jones even confirms it on the tape.
For God's sakes, let's get on with it. We've lived as no other people have lived and loved. We've had as much of this world as you're going to get. Let's just be done with it. Let's be done with the agony of it.
The look on Gloria's face, with tears streaming down her face, was trapped. Trapped. And no way out. And I felt rage, torture. Why aren't you doing anything? I felt complete guilt.
Carter's wife died in his arms, holding their dead child. He now believes he should have seen it all coming.
I can look back now on things that were clearly red flags. Not even yellow flags, but red flags. And I chose to rationalize and ignore those red flags, which is very painful for me to live with. Very much so.
Jim Jones took his own life that day. His legacy, Jonestown, is the world's most horrific cult massacre. The death toll, 909, is evidence of just how dangerous a cult leader can be.
Carter's testimony about murder as being the cause of death at Jonestown greatly affects how I placed Jim Jones on my scale of evil. Previously, when believing that all the deaths at Jonestown were a result of suicide, even if it was compelled by Jones, I placed him at a level 12. But if Jones and his executioners systematically murdered hundreds in a premeditated slaughter, as Tim Carter has revealed, then I must reevaluate. I placed those executioners that injected people with cyanide against their will at a level 15. But I put Jim Jones higher on the scale. Like Manson and Asahara, Jones seems not to have physically killed anyone himself, but the hundreds of deaths that he encouraged assigns him a greater responsibility. As the cold-blooded designer of this mass death scene that took the lives of more than 900 people, Jim Jones falls at the top of my scale at a 22.